Hello, and welcome to this series of vodcasts on Gordie Gillespie, who many of us believe was the greatest coach of all time. I hope that these conversations with players and friends of Gordie will help illuminate Gordie's greatness. But more importantly, I hope we can learn how Gordie did it. He was the winningest collegiate baseball coach of all time and the greatest Illinois high school football coach of all time. But we're not interested in his secrets of winning games, but his secrets of winning the hearts, minds, and the development of his young athletes. Today's conversation on Gordie features Dave Laketa. Dave is in a select group of one, in that he played for Gordie at St. Francis. He worked with Gordie as sports information director. He was Gordie's boss after being promoted to athletic director. And then he hired Gordie. Now that is a story I find fascinating. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And I am so pleased today to have a conversation, which I'm sure is going to be a riveting conversation with Dave Laketa. Dave is the athletic director at the University of St. Francis. He's been at St. Francis for 31 years, and that doesn't even count the 4 years that he played football for Gordie at St. Francis. And Dave, I think that you probably are the all-time leader in wearing Gordie hats. You have the most connections to Gordie, I think, of anyone. Now, Tony Delgado and I say that we think we're the only guys who played 8 seasons with Gordie. You know, Tom Kennedy, I know, played at least 7. I'm not sure if Tom played in his freshman year basketball, but you have the most connections, starting with he recruited you, and then you played football for him, and then you worked alongside him as sports information director, and then you rose through the ranks and became athletic director so that you were Gordie's boss. And then you had the incredible honor of, after Gordie left, to go to, now what does the winningest collegiate baseball coach of all time do when he retires? He goes to a smaller school, Ripon, up in Wisconsin. And you have, which I'm sure we'll get to, you had this wacky idea to hire this guy who's 187 years old to come back for a second stint at St. Francis. So you had the distinction of actually hiring Gordie. So there's a million places we could start with your conversation about Gordie, Dave. But I tell you what, why don't we start sort of at the beginning and tell us your story of how you got recruited by Gordie.
Well, I'll do that, but I'll also let you know that, Tony was obviously Gordie's right-hand man for a number of years on the baseball side. But the one thing that they didn't agree on was Tony always wanted to stay up late and Gordie did not. So guess who became Gordie's roommate because Tony stayed up too late? Myself.
Oh, all right. I'm going to add another to the list there. There's another hat.
So we had plenty of conversations. It was really... those formative years were really the best years of my life when I was a student here. And like you said, it started, I was from Lamont, which is about 20 minutes away. And actually at the time, Joliet Catholic High School, was really huge with athletics between football and baseball. So a lot of the top student athletes at Lamont wound up going to Joliet Catholic. And that always, got under the skin of those who wanted to stay at Lamont and have success there and, go through the public schools. So there was always that, bias, sort of like everybody who has the bias against the New York Yankees because they were always so successful, and Coach Gillespie and Joliet Catholic because they were always so successful. So then a dear friend of mine, Bob Voss, who just recently passed away, was helping Gordie to start the first ever football program at St. Francis in 1986. So my senior year was obviously 1985 for football at Lamont, and Coach Voss knew me, and so he recruited me as both a place kicker and a defensive back. And so so he set the stage saying, hey, would you be interested in St. Francis? I said, yeah, I'd be willing to, do a visit and consider it and be a part of the first ever football program. And so he said, okay, I'm going to set up this meeting with Coach Gillespie. You just show up that day and he'll talk to you a little bit. So I do that. I go to St. Francis on that day. I, wait outside in the waiting area with Pat Getson, another great person that we truly miss on a daily basis. She was the administrative assistant to Coach Gillespie. And so then she lets me in Coach Gillespie's office and he says, hi, Dan. And I was awestruck because I'm like, okay, my name's not Dan, my name's Dave, but you are Coach Gillespie and you win all kinds of football and baseball and every other kind of game. So I'm not going to say anything. So we had a nice conversation. And soon enough, I became a fighting Saint in 1986, and they locked the door and never let me out, Ray.
They let you peek out a window once in a while.
Every once in a while. Yeah. So for 35 years, it's been a great experience with so many people, that you talked about, Pat Sullivan and Tony Delgado, and obviously Coach Gillespie and Pat Getson and Bob Voss, and, and my true love for Gordie's wife as well, Joan Gillespie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What's fascinating about that, and now you planted the seed. I'm going to call you Dan at some point, Bill.
There you go.
But you and I have talked about Gordie's memory, and for him to make a gaffe like that is really amazing. I mean, I think I can count on one or two hands the gaffes that Gordie has made in all the years that he's coached. But we talked about the 4th and 1 sometimes that he went for it against Rockford Boylan, and then the drive, which is part of Joliet iconic sports history, and people don't understand why he did that, and that's one of the things I wanted to explain in these podcasts. But in any case, for him to call you Dan, that is really cute. I wish he was here and we could talk to him about that.
You talk about the 4th and 1. So I've got a bit of history here at St. Francis. I mentioned to you that I was a place kicker. Mm-hmm. So my first year I couldn't play because I had an injury to my arm that never healed. Ooh. So I redshirted my first year. So then the second year I was place kicking along with a couple other guys, and so I was scheduled to go out. It was 4th down, and we were going to kick about a 45-yard field goal. And as well as anybody how Gordie always liked to go for it on 4th down. So, he sent me out to kick the field goal. And then just before I was getting ready to kick, he decided to call timeout and put the offense back on the field. So I am, to this day, what is it, 34 years later, I am still the only place kicker in St. Francis history to never attempt a field goal.
Well, that was going to be your first field goal. Oh, wow.
So I just kicked extra points the rest of the year.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So
wow, that's absolutely amazing. Let me get a little bit more serious on you, because I've been dying to ask you this question for years. So one of the most important segments of Gordie's life that a lot of people don't understand, and you, of all people, especially with your 20 years of being athletic director at St. Francis, can give me a tremendous perspective on this. So to set it up for everyone listening, in 1955, Gordie was the basketball coach at Lewis, and he was coaching part-time football at Joliet Catholic. And the school only had about 150, maybe less, students, and most of them were on the GI Bill after the war. And really, the school only started as a bastion for those who served in the armed services with the GI Bill. Others were there, but that was mostly their students. And he went to the president because he worried about the institution failing and he's going to lose his job. And so he went to the president, Brennan, and he says, why don't we start minor sports I can recruit some of the kids from, say, from Joliet Catholic. They can come out and play baseball or track or tennis, a bunch of minor sports, and they'll pay most of the tuition. We'll give them $50 and they can brag in the Joliet area. I've got an athletic scholarship to Lewis. And Father Brennan said, this is a great idea. And they have to remember that 45 years later, this man is named Baseball Coach of the Century. Father Brennan says to him, great, let's start with baseball. You'll be the coach, but I have no money to give you. So you'll have to coach for free. And he started out playing 15 games. I can remember when we played in 1960, we played Sam Houston State. They had played close to 60 games, plus they played a fall schedule. It didn't count. And we had played, I think we played about 30 some games, but the year before, Gordie only played about 18 or 19 games. So it was essentially a club sport, what we would call today. And almost by accident, he got that 62 team together. And he had some great ball players at almost every position, some great pitching. And all of a sudden, he finishes third in the country, almost by accident. And he didn't have to recruit in baseball ever again. Yet he also started his beloved track team. He started all these minor sports. They became so much a part of him. Because I was just thinking right before we signed on, he coached over 2,200 people. A few women back at St. Francis when he started the women's basketball program. But how many other athletes did he start in these minor sports? So when he went to St. Francis in 1976, one of the absolute key ideas that he brought to Dr. Orr, who was the president at the time, he says, and Dr. Orr was worried that St. Francis was going to suffer and die. In fact, Dr. Orr told me that first year he was president, he needed 435 students. And if he didn't get them, he had no money in the bank. He would have to bankrupt the university, the college at the time. And he got, instead of 435, he got 436. He said, that was my first miracle. My second miracle was when Gordie Gillespie called me and said he might want to come to St. Francis. And he sat down with me and he explained his minor sports program and how that can be such a great revenue, but not just revenue. And this is what I'd like to ask you, but also it sets up a whole positive environment in the university. Dr. Orr told me that was his second miracle that he ever had at St. Francis. So how do you, as the athletic director, view the minor sports?
Well, I would agree with Coach Gillespie, and you're even starting to see that again at the small college level with schools adding sports. I didn't know just 8 years ago we added men's and women's bowling, and who would have thought that a long time ago?
What a great idea! I wouldn't have thought of that, but it's a recreational rather than kind of it's a half a sport, but the camaraderie and the team spirit that Gordie talked about all the time. Wow, what a great idea. Well, go ahead.
You're starting to see even beach volleyball at the small college level for obviously not places in the Midwest, but over in California and down in the southern states and stuff like that. But like you said, that was so important to him. And when he and Pat Sullivan arrived in 1976 at St. Francis, the only two programs that were there at the time, were baseball and men's basketball. So there were two sports and about maybe 45 to 60 student athletes. And he recruited Lyle Hicks. You may remember Lyle in some of those conversations. Lyle didn't know anything about tennis, but he was starting at St. Francis, and Coach Gillespie said, hey, I want you to take over the tennis program. And like anybody else, we were all wowed by Coach Gillespie, and Lyle Hicks just said, sure, I'll do it. So he started the men's tennis program, and then eventually the women's tennis program started. But, you talk about the minor sports, and there were those, the tennises, the golfs. And at the time in the 70s, there weren't as many women's sports. It was AIAW, it wasn't NCAA or NAI. So women's sports were really just starting. And Coach Gillespie, true to his form, he did not care that, I'm just coaching baseball or I'm just coaching basketball. Besides baseball, he then took on the women's basketball program that first year at St. Francis to get women's programs started. And the funny story there is that was the first time he had ever coached women's sports. And so, as you know, Coach Gillespie only wanted to play the best. And you look through the record books when he was at Lewis and when he was at St. Francis, he was, at the time, they could play the Big Ten teams and all these other teams. You talked about Sam Houston State at the time and all these other teams that in this day and age, they won't play you in some of those sports. And so he put DePaul on the schedule. He put Northwestern on that first ever women's basketball schedule. Well, these girls were, first year players going against, those established players in established programs at DePaul and Northwestern. And those first games, especially the first one, our girls couldn't even get the ball past half court because DePaul and Northwestern was using a full court press the whole time. So Coach Gillespie would call timeout, devise another plan. And after he, got out of the huddle, as was common for him with baseball and coaching basketball and football, was always to pat the player on the back of the butt. Well, he did that not once, but twice and got a stare from one of the women's basketball players. And it was that second stare that he finally figured out, I can't do this in women's sports.
That's gaffe number 2. Dan and Pat.
But like you said, it was the minor sports and it was also starting the junior varsity programs. And for a number of years, those junior varsity programs were really feeder programs, similar to like minor league baseball is to, the major leagues. One of the players that graduated around the same time as me was Les Norman. In his freshman year, he was playing on the junior varsity before he got called up. And by the time he got to his senior year, he was drafted by the Boston Red Sox and played a number of years for the Kansas City Royals. But at that time, that was huge. And it was that, developmental squad that led to many of those student athletes eventually advancing to the varsity program. And like you said, in sports like baseball, where there was 30 on the varsity program, there were another 30 on the JV program. So he had one year, if I can recall correctly, he had upwards of close to between 70 and 80 people in the baseball program.
Really?
Between the two teams. And then obviously Pat Sullivan did the same with basketball, and he had anywhere between 30 and 40 between the varsity and the JV. And that carried on to all the women's programs. It wasn't just, with the men's programs, it was with the women's programs as well.
I'm absolutely astonished. I did not know that.
Yeah, so he went from
brought in twice as many players as other schools were doing with these JV programs.
Right. So they came with 60, when they started when they came over in 1976, like we said, there were about 60 student athletes in 2 sports. And then, when they reached their maximum, I think they were up to 16 sports, maybe 16 to 18, and over 350 student athletes.
That's absolutely, and talk about how he interacted with the students who played in the minor sports. So I think a lot of people might say, well, he started them and then he was the baseball coach. He was over here and they were over there. I bet
He
that's
always, as best as possible, because he was the athletic director at the time up until from 76 to 86, he was the athletic director. And then
in his spare time, he was
yeah. And then when we started football, then he became the athletic chairman and Pat Sullivan took over as the athletic director. But even in those early years, you talk about him, in his free time. If you go back to some of the original stats and stuff, you'll see he put his name as the sports information director too, because he was handling all of those things. It was him and Pat and Pat Getson. But yeah, whenever he had the opportunity, he went out to the tennis matches. He went out, to the golf course to see the kids competing and stuff like that. And even, when I brought him back the second time after he left St. Francis to go to Ripon, he always, after meetings, he was always talking to the head coaches of the minor sports and asking them how their programs were going. And whenever, when they were successful, when they won a conference championship, and this as well as anybody, Ray, because I'm sure you received many of the letters, he always would write a handwritten note and, put it in an envelope and, just espousing on the great things that, the tennis program was doing or the golf program was doing by winning its 4th straight conference championship, and congratulations and continued success and things like that.
And that meant so much to those coaches, I think, because especially at that time, when we played for him in the 60s, we knew what a wonderful human being he was.
And all those letters were, like you said, all those letters were special. And, you got them as well as anybody. And when they came across your desk at Temple after you wrote another book or you had success with something else that, you might have referenced to him on a phone conversation that you had with him, or when you stopped by the area to visit him, and you got that letter, a week or two later, how special how special that was. And you probably got many of them in the right-hand side of your desk drawer to this day.
They're right over here. But especially in writing this book, he would write me letters all the time and say, I just thought of something. And what was one of the stories about he had a Dear John letter when he was in the Navy. And that is such an incredible, funny story that I think you'll enjoy. If you get the audio book, I'm going to send you the audio book. It is so hilarious when he gets this letter from his sweetheart from Illinois. And I can remember those letters. And I didn't know about, I knew that he paid attention to the minor sports, but to hear you describing it as from your position as athletic director, how he helped those, not only the athletes, but the coaches. I hadn't thought of that either. Yep. And he's talking to them and he's sending them letters. One of the things that I want to discover in starting this website about Gordie and this book is, how did he develop what is, I think, his 6th of his 10 commandments, and that's team pride. And this is a great aspect of it. It wasn't just his team that he wanted the players to love each other, but it was almost every team that he had started. He started all these minor sports. He had a way of praising you, even when you flubbed up. Sully tells the story about when he was a pitcher. He was a freshman, and we were playing a team that we always beat, and it was tied, and we were going into the 9th inning. He had gotten 8 straight outs. All he needs is 1 more out, and we had the best hitters coming up, and Spezio and Fillins and Bachman, and he gave up 3 straight singles, and we lose the game. And he heard of footsteps behind him, and he was desolate as a freshman to do this to his teammates, and he felt that he let everyone down. He felt he let the whole team down. And what did Gordie do? Gordie sprinted out to the mound, put his arm around Pat, said, "You're going to win an awful lot of games here at Lewis University. I want you to forget about the last few minutes, and you become the best." And now the whole team saw this. The whole team said, "Oh, that's how we react to this young kid Sullivan." And And, Sully has carried that the rest of his life. And he's continually doing that. And those of us who get one of those letters, we cherish it. You're absolutely right. So he was constantly doing it. It was almost like when you get up in the morning, you turn your computer on and it's always on. He had these things that were always on in his head. I got to praise people. I have to make them feel good about themselves, even when they mess up.
And that is so huge, and it's even bigger in this day and age. You in the last few years, from the college ranks to the professional ranks, you see even the female tennis player just recently pulled out of, what was it, the French Open, I believe,
yes.
Because of the mental things that she was going through. And people never understood that, and it's really coming into the spotlight in the past few years. And these are the things that the student athletes of today are really expecting. And the old ways of coaching really don't work anymore. But Coach Gillespie was 50 years ahead of his time, like you said, because he was always talking positively and keeping your self-confidence and wanting you to have that self-esteem for the next time. And that's why he was so successful. You ask anybody who he played for, and they'll say, especially in football or even in baseball, when they were going up against a pitcher who maybe threw 98 miles an hour and had all these guns, for scouts behind home plate, checking how fast the opposing pitcher was throwing. All of St. Francis teams, all of Lewis teams, and I'm sure Ripon was the same way, that maybe they felt undermanned or they didn't have the talent or the ability to beat these teams. And, they always beat them. We went down and played Illinois State one year, and we had them beat, and they made a last second field goal with 18 seconds to go. Illinois State, a Division I AA school, and St. Francis, an NAIA school. But that's how it was. And he always, talked positively. He may get on you at a certain point, but then shortly thereafter, he was pulling you to the side, putting his hand over your shoulders and talking about the situation and telling you that you'll do better the next time. You'll be great the next time when you face this guy or this team. And these are the things we need, we're going to do, and we're going to face these great teams, and we're going to be better off. Even if we lose, we're going to be better off down the road, not only as student athletes, but as people and administrators and bosses and members of, and fathers, and things like that, because of these situations that we're going through now as student athletes at Lewis, at St. Francis, at Ripon, and all the success, as you said, Ray. You can go on and on, all the different students that played for him that eventually got into coaching, or like you were successful as a professor. Whatever the profession it was, there are so many people that have been so successful, having gone through one of Coach Gillespie's programs.
You just engendered a marvelous idea. So again, through these conversations, I really want to get more insight into Gordie and what you just gave me a phenomenal idea on how he did this. Because you were talking about Illinois State. We played them when they were Illinois Normal in basketball. And it was my junior year. And they announced that they were going to become Illinois State, not Illinois Normal. But folks listening, a normal school was a teacher's college. So they were going to become this great university, and they were going to become Division I, and they were going to play. So the coach told Gordie, well, we'll never play Lewis anymore. Boy, did we want to beat them. So we had a 1-point lead, and we're stalling, and there were only seconds to go. And I catch a pass from Tony, and I turn like this to make another pass. And I elbow the guy right in the nose. and I knock him down. And the whistle goes. I said, ay, ay, ay. I just committed a foul. They're going to get 2 shots to win the game. Sure enough, the referee says, foul on that guy. So I went from the depths to the heights. I said, wow, I got 2 shots to put the game away. 5 seconds, the 3-point lead. There were no 3-point shots way back when, 200 years ago when I played. But anyway, we get to the huddle. And Gordie says, okay, Ray makes 2 shots. We just let them dribble down the court. Everything's fine. If Ray makes 1, it's a 2-point game. Then we have to play soft defense. If they score and tie it up, that's fine. If Ray misses both, I said, why did you say that? Why did you say Ray misses both? I mean, why? Why did you put that? I want to tell you, I was so nervous. I think the ball didn't even hit the rim. So anyway, I missed it. They missed their next shot and we won the game. But afterwards, he talked to me about that. But that engendered an idea. So you just said, even if we lose. And we just talked about that Gordie's always thinking ahead of us. I think that a program in his brain was running when we're in a tough situation, like I had this free throw, or 4th and 1, or all these, that's one of the great aspects of sports. He said that the athletic field is the greatest classroom there is, because where else can you put a student in that situation where you can fail, and yet it's okay. We're going to show you how to fail and come back from it. So rather than, as you said, even if we lose, I think a part of his brain way down here says, especially if we lose. So that 4th and 1 in the iconic game against Rockford Boylan, he's thinking, well, if we don't make it, the defense will take over.
Yep. And
I'm going to trust the defense. So I'm saying in that one simple little decision to go for it on the 18-yard line, their own 18, in a 0-0 game with only seconds to go, minutes to go for it, everyone thought he was absolutely crazy. Sure enough, they missed it. Rockford Boylan goes in, scores. Now there's only 2.5, something like that, minutes left. Now he's handing it over to the offense. The message he's giving is essential. I mean, he wanted to win that game as much as, if not more than anyone else. But he saw beyond. And he says, especially if we don't make it here, I'm going to trust you guys. You can do it. And if you don't do it, it's okay. There's tomorrow. And you'll remember this. I'll bet you every single one of those players on that team, even the bench players, remembered that drive when they, and even if they hadn't made the touchdown and then the 2-point extra to win the game 8-7, and then they went out and won the state championship. Every one of them is going to remember that. And I have a feeling, now that I'm talking to you, that he said it's fine. If you, like when Sully screwed up, that's fine. Now's my opportunity, Gordie said to himself. I don't know if he said it consciously, but he had that program inside him saying, now I'm going to go out and talk to Sullivan. After the game, he talked to me about shooting free throws and kind of let me off the hook. I felt absolutely miserable that I had screwed up for the team, that I had missed that free throw. And it was only a few seconds, but he let me off the hook, and I just felt like $1 million. I went from here up to the heights that the coach would take that.
Well, 2 things to that point, Ray. The one thing that he was famous for here at St. Francis, and I don't know if it was at Lewis as well, but when we had a tough loss, where we were right in the game and lost in the last second or lost in the last inning, if it was a baseball game, the one thing he always would say to the reporters, we just ran out of innings or we just ran out of time. And again, the point there was that we're going to get this done the next time, and we're going to be successful. And we can't look at this as a negative that we lost, but look at it as a positive for down the road. The other thing that he did, which I thought was brilliant, if, let's say, the second baseman didn't cover a play at second base, okay, he would scream and yell at everybody in the dugout. and he would say, "Hey, second baseman, get over here. What are you doing over there? Why aren't you covering the back?" And then when the second baseman would come in, he'd put his arm around the kid's shoulder and say, "Hey, you didn't go where you needed to go, and this is where you have to improve." But the point was, he was trying to get the attention of the kids on the bench who were at that position, so that they know when they get in the game that, hey, don't make this same mistake. But because those kids weren't in the game, they didn't feel like, oh, I really screwed up. But it was a lesson for them that when they did get on the field and they had to perform, this is what they had to do. But for the guy on the field, again, he was trying to be positive and say, hey, you'll get them next time. But it was a lesson for those guys that were in the dugout. He's going to yell at them because they weren't really in the game and in the play. But when they got on the field, they would know for the next time, we got to cover second base, or we got to cover this bunt this way. And